Hi, my name is James Andriella, and you're listening to the Back to Human podcast. On today's show, I have the honor of speaking with the author of The Montessori Toddler, book that I have right here, co-author of The Montessori Baby and The Montessori Child, and also host of the Montessori Notebook Podcast, Simone Davies. Simone has over 20 years of experience as an AMI-trained Montessori educator, and on today's episode, I would like to dive into her book, The Montessori Toddler, to share some of the principles behind Montessori education, discuss how to inspire more creativity with our children, learn what Montessori activities are, learn how we can develop more independence with our children and give them more responsibility within the family, and how we can bring these Montessori principles into everyday practical life. This book has honestly changed the way that I view and interact with my son, Jax. He's almost 3 years old. It's allowed me to be much more patient and present with him, especially during his less than pleasant, although rather infrequent tantrums. And admittedly, I was a little bit behind with reading this book with Jax and his education. I was looking into other things, but Jade, my wife, put this on my nightstand to read. And after a while, I did end up picking it up, and I realized that a lot of the things that Jade was doing around the house, how she set up his room, the activities that she was engaging him in, and even her interactions with Jax were modeled by this approach. And I just saw how effective it was. Jax contributes a ton around the house. Just the other day, he was helping me clean the dishes. He helps me take out the recycling. He helps me cook. And he always helps Jade do laundry. He's always trying to be involved. And we listen to that. We kind of let him lead the way a little bit with some things. We pay attention to what he's interested in, and then we just place those objects in his environment, and he takes off. So, this book has definitely changed my approach with my child Jackson, especially with our next on the way. I feel like this is vital for any new parents that are out there. If you don't really have any type of guidelines to follow, this would personally, in my opinion, uh, be something to look into. Without further ado, Simone, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited already to hear how you're using it in your home, and I'm excited to share it with your audience today.
Mm. I was listening to a few of your episodes just over the past 2 days as well, and it's interesting to hear how other people are approaching raising their children and kind of just giving them freedom and independence. And if I had one goal for my kid, that would be the main thing. Would be I want him to be able to be free. I want him to think for himself, and I don't want him to feel like he just has to be like everyone else or feel pressured to um, I know I did back in school with all these tests to do well in subjects that aren't necessarily going to be important a few years later or not even something that you're really interested in. So I want him to find what his passion and what his love is and just kind of follow that. So this is what I see with the Montessori approach. So would you be able to tell me how you got involved with Montessori education? Where did this start?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like many people who go into Montessori, it's with my own children. So when Oliver and Emma were small, they're now 24 and 23. I was looking for a school for them, and I'd heard about Montessori, and we went to an open day. And when you walk into a Montessori classroom for the first time, and it's something that resonates with you. You walk in and you're so excited because you're like, this is where I wish I had learned. The environment's so beautifully prepared. There's all these engaging materials, and all of the children seem so self-directed. They knew where things belonged. They took responsibility for putting them back. And I was like, how does this working? There's no teacher standing in front telling them what to do. And it was amazing that when you have this carefully prepared environment, the children can follow their interests, and the guides there, the teacher, to connect them with the environment, to show them, how to get further with something and to meet every child how they are. So um, I loved it so much. I started going to Montessori playgroup with my son and my then newborn, and I learned so much about how I could apply these principles also at home. And by going to this Montessori playgroup, I'm like, I think I need to study this. So I went and did my Montessori training, and then life moved me to Amsterdam. So I ended up setting up my own Montessori playgroup here. After I'd finished my training, and I've now worked with thousands of families and written some books and run online workshops for families as well, because it's become not just a way of being with your toddler, but a way of living with other people in
Mm.
society. So I love the name of your podcast, Back to Human, because it's just about how we become a better human, right? And how we raise our children to be the best version of themselves.
Exactly. And when do your kids begin? What age did you start them with these playgroups?
So Oliver was 18 months and like Emma was a baby coming along beside. And so that was till 3 years old. And then they went into a Montessori preschool. And then we moved to the Netherlands and they went straight to a Montessori school here. It's in the public system. So they stayed till they were 12 years old. And then they went to traditional high schools, but we did Montessori parenting and home right
So it
through.
starts pretty early. It starts very early.
Yeah, so you actually, you can do Montessori from birth, which is really interesting as well because, yeah, you've got a baby on the way, and it's almost preparing the environment before they're there. So now, was it Jack's your son's name?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, so they can already talk with the baby in utero, and that voice will become a point of reference for the newborn child when they come out of the uterus and into the real world. And so that point of reference will be reassuring to them. If you play music or anything like that, then you could play music, and that will also become a point of reference. And then you can also set up your home so that it's very predictable for the newborn baby. So whenever I sit in this chair, this is where I get fed. So whether it's mama or papa who's feeding me, I know that this is my feeding chair. And I always lie down here when I sleep, or I always go to sleep in the same kind of places. And this is where I always change my diaper. So it gives me a lot of predictability when everything else is so different. It makes them feel very secure and safe. And there's this beautiful topicino, which is like a quilted blanket that you can use with a newborn baby that kind of like softens everyone carrying the baby and taking a lot of stimulus in from the external world, and they can lie on that, and that has like the smells of their family on that cushion, which gives them also that another point of reference. Also the way that we respect them, like when we go to pick up a newborn baby, you can say, I'm going to pick you up, and wait for them to like raise their head a little bit, and all of a sudden you're getting consent, and you're also showing the baby that you just don't come in, sweep them. You're at least giving them a heads up of what you're going to do, and then the baby's less likely to cry. And for example, when you go to blow Jax's nose, they hate it, right? But if you say, I'm going to blow your nose right now, and you pause, give them a moment to realize they're going to blow your nose, then you can actually get a tissue, wipe their nose. And even better, now that Jax is older, you can take him to a mirror and you can say, oh, I can see you've got some mucus under your nose. Look, this is how you wipe your nose. And you get a tissue and you wipe your nose and you put it into the bin, and then he can kind of copy you. And then you might say, can I finish off? And then you can just wipe any mucus that he's missed. So it's like just being very respectful, very kind, using gentle hands. And yeah, you can do that it's never too early to start with Montessori, but equally it's never too late. So if someone's listening to the podcast and they've got a 15-year-old, you can still apply the same principles.
Mhm. There's a great book since you mentioned the baby being in the womb and then you even creating the environment before they come here. It's called The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. So they can hear, like they're conscious in the womb too. Everything that's
Yeah,
going on in their surroundings, they can kind of pick up on the subtleties of that type of stuff. And I like the blanket. It's almost like a little anchor point so they feel safe even if they're in a different environment. And
absolutely.
what you mentioned with how you can communicate to the kids. As a first time father, all I've kind of seen, I wasn't privy to Montessori or even like Waldorf or alternative methods of education, is just how much you can actually communicate with a toddler or a younger baby. As you're mentioning, before you lift the baby up, you can tell them exactly what you're going to do. So it's almost as if you're including them, they're a part of it. It's not like they are not a person. And that's almost how I see Jax because he's very well developed. He talks a ton. He knows every single Bob Marley song. He could sing it verbatim. So he loves music. We put guitars, drums, all the things in his room, and he just takes off with it. He's got his own little microphone. He sings them. Uh, but instead of using like the goo goo gaga voices or the baby voices, we can almost talk to him as if he is an adult. Sure, there's like lapses in the prefrontal cortex and um, his decision making isn't always the best. He may seem like a little rational if he gets upset with stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into, like tantrums. But other than that, you can kind of talk to at least Jax just as you would any other human being. And he's
Mm.
very, very capable. He picks up things very, very quickly. And I feel like it's because we have the environment and we have entrusted him that he is capable. We've empowered him with his own decision making. he decides what he wants for breakfast as long as it's like within limits. He's not going to go for goldfish or whatever it is first thing in the morning, which we don't carry. Um, but yeah, it's amazing how much you can actually communicate with them. And this has been something that other parents have brought up. It's like, I can't believe he can talk this much. It's like, yeah, he's very, very smart. He may be a little bit shy when he's around new people, which is kind of normal, but he's very much capable, very conscious, picks up on everything. He hears everything and he's observing what you're doing. He'll model our behavior. If we're working out, he wants to jump in. Sees a client working out, he wants to jump in too. So, what are some of the principles within Montessori education, and how does Montessori education differ from traditional public education?
Yeah. I think what you touched on, that trust, is something that is so different from traditional education, because trust means that we're going to set up our environment, we're going to follow his lead, we're going to observe him so that he takes the lead in his own development, which no one would trust that a child would want to do anything. They'd just lie on the couch if I didn't, teach them the colors or teach them how to talk or teach them maths and these kind of things. And so it's a flip. So in a traditional education system, you have the adult at the top and this is the child, and it's a one directional, this is what I need to teach you. And even today, you might have a few different lessons to meet different needs of children, but it's basically the adult deciding what needs to be learned and it going in. Like with Montessori, it's the child engaging in this prepared environment with a prepared adult, and we're there to inform, like to help them, guide them along the way as they become themselves. And so you've got the principles of self-direction, you've got the skills of observation from the adult, because you said I put things in there that he's interested in, so that he can engage with them. And that prepared environment means that, he's going to, if he wants to help himself to breakfast, we need to put things so that he can access them. So you put his favorite things that are okay at his level in the fridge, or you have a bowl down low so he can go and get a bowl. You can have small jugs with a little bit of milk so he can pour that in his glass or on his cereal or whatever he's having for breakfast. And so you have these ways of working with him so that it keeps kids interested, keeps kids curious, and you're teaching them how to think critically, how to solve problems, and all. I think it's why people are becoming more interested in Montessori, because they're like, this top-down system is not that practical because now we can put it into AI or Google. But actually, what kids need to know is how to work with other people, how to solve problems, how to think for themselves and be creative thinkers. So, yeah, I love. There's some of the principles of Montessori. We can go into any of those in more detail that you like. But, the idea that, testing kids is something that we all hate. And actually, if you're observing the children in the classroom, for example, you don't need to test them because you know where each child's up to and which lesson they're up to and which lesson you need to help them with. And in the younger ages, it's usually an individual lesson or just with two children. And then as in between 6 to 12, you'll have a group of children who are having a lesson together.
So what would a typical classroom day look like? So you said there's like 1 or 2 lessons. Is it 1 or 2 lessons for the week? And once they've kind of mastered this, then they move on to something else? Or can you give me an example?
Yeah, so basically, you walk into a Montessori classroom, and the classroom's prepared with different learning areas. So there's a math area, there's a language area, there's things for geography and cultural studies, there's practical life activities, which is like having things if they want to make their own snack or clean the classroom or look after the plants and those kind of things as well. And so each child walks in and they think, I just feel like reading a book to start with today. So I'm going to go over to the book corner. And then another child might go in. I am so like energized. I'm just going to get straight into my maths, and they'll go and take whatever maths they're up to, and they'll take a mat and or take it to a table, and they'll work there. And then the next child will come in and they want to work with a friend. So they decide that they're going to take care of the plants and they're going to get a little watering can, they're going to fill it up. And the teacher's not telling them what to do. They're basically doing what they feel like. And you might even see one child, like Jax, takes a little bit of time to warm up. So he stands in the corner and he's just like watching and observing. And we don't interrupt that because that's actually a valid way to learn too. And when he's ready, he'll come in and join and take over. And then the lesson part is the teacher noticing, oh, I noticed Jack's had some buttons on his coat and he was having trouble. So we've got a button frame and I'm going to show him the buttons sometime today. But I'm not going to interrupt him when he's in the middle of something. But at a moment, I might just say, Jack, I noticed that you were trying to do your buttons. Can I show you how the buttons work? And so they will take him over to that side of the classroom and show him the button frame. So that is a lesson based on something I've observed. With a child who's finishing their math work and you're like, oh, they've really mastered that. I'm going to show them the next math activity because everything's built on top of each other. And so then the teacher will sit down and give them a math lesson. And if a child needs the teacher during that lesson, they put their hand on the teacher's shoulder so that the teacher knows that they need some help. When there's a pause in the lesson, she'll say, oh, he or she will ask the child what they need. And maybe it's something really quick, like, oh, we've run out of tissues, something like that. And they can help. Or it might be like, oh, I need help with this. Okay, thanks for letting me know, and I'll come to you when I can. And so that just goes on all day. So one child might get 3 lessons in a day if that's what they need new material for, but it's based on your observation. So there's not a specific number of lessons that any child will get in a week. It's, yeah, if there's one really big work, this child might have 1 lesson and they practice that all week. So it really depends where they're at.
So it's very much child-led where the teacher is almost the observer, just kinda seeing where they can help out a little bit rather than the top-down approach where this is the end all be all, this is exactly what you need to know, and, it essentially, in my opinion, maybe a drastic word for it, but it kinda creates, like, drones overall if you're doing this for I've done the math on it, it's like 10,000 hours if we just have kids, young boys, girls too, that are just sitting for hours on end, it's, like, very, very boring. We wonder where ADD or ADHD comes from. Maybe your kid is literally just bored. Like, he's not interested in this, and if you did give him something interested in that he is interested in, he would be focused.
Yeah.
Mhm. So you said that your children, the oldest, I believe, started traditional school when they were 12th, not 12th grade, but when they were 12, correct?
Years old. Yeah, exactly.
So what would typical curriculum look like then? How do the two kind of blend in? Or I guess what I'm trying to ask here is compared to traditional public education or even private education, is there any type of testing, any type of requirements that are need to be met or certain subjects that need to be covered?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is it depends on where you're living, how many rules there are. There's some that are completely out of the academic system. Here in the Netherlands, you have testing at the end of primary school, which is around 12 to see which high school you go into. And so they literally have a subject in this last year. It was like, this is how you do tests. And you get to practice the tests so that you can then know how to do tests. And yeah, my kids did finish the tests and went into like the top level of their high schools that they can go into. There's other in the US, for example, I'm living in the Netherlands, but in the US, I know that in the 9 to 12-year-olds, for example, they have this is the curriculum. These are things that we need to make sure we cover. But we'll just do that. Like they get so much groundwork done in basically what's in the Montessori classroom, and then they might just need to meet a couple of extra things that are not covered by the Montessori materials that are in the space. But it goes so far beyond just curriculum. Like in the 6 to 12 years, you have these going outs, and the children, based on their interests, can have a group of children who want to go and find out more about dinosaurs or more about baking and things like that. And they'll call up the museum or they'll call up a bakery and say, we'd like to come and visit. When would be appropriate? Can we bring a list of questions? And then they have to look up the public transport and work out how they're going to get there. And they write a thank you note afterwards. And there's like a parent or a teacher is basically goes along as a chaperone. And if they get on the wrong bus, they don't say anything. They let them get on the wrong bus, right? And then if they never get to the appointment, it doesn't matter because that's also part of the learning, right? How long does it take before they realize they're on the wrong bus? And then the correcting it. And, that's what happens in life, right? We make mistakes, but it's not really a mistake. It's just an opportunity to learn, right?
That's
So,
funny.
yes, so many things like that. But, yeah, so there are checks and balances along the way. So, for example, my children had to make sure that by the school holidays, they'd finish these parts of their math and these part of their language. And they're always meant to have like regular weekly meetings to check that they're on target to meet those goals and those kind of things. And if the teacher notices that the child is really avoiding an area completely, say they're not into, maths, but they really like language, then they might be like, okay, I noticed you've read Harry Potter, and we're going to work out how much of the book you've read. And then they can work out fractions and things from that. So it's their job to engage the child in something that they are avoiding. So that there's always progression as well.
What have you seen is the most challenging group to work with, or even with your kids? Where was there a period of time when they, I guess, struggled? I guess that would be the word that I would use for it.
It's so individual, right? So some children, like adults and parents find the toddler years really difficult because they are very emotional and they have, they're not using their brain in the same way. They have a different type of brain than an adult brain. So for some people, that's very difficult. For some people, the 6 to 12 age group's really difficult because that's when they start to think for themselves, and it's not always the same as what the parent thinks. And so it looks like they're pushing back, but actually, it's like they actually have their job in the 6 to 12 years is to work out what's right and wrong and was a grey bit in between. So, for example, why do they allowed to do that and we do this? And it's not that we start getting defensive. Well, because no, 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 no. But actually, it's like, oh, that's really interesting that you notice that, and because in our family, it's important to us that we blah blah blah, and in their family, they do that, and it's just actually accepting two different types of families and two different types of value systems, if that makes sense as well. So some people find the 6 to 12 because they're a bit rude, they're a little bit bossy, they're starting to develop their own opinion. Then I was just out with a friend and she's really fine. She said, if I knew the teenagers were teenagers, I wouldn't have had a child. And she was joking. But of course, like the teenage years are pretty intense for some people. And that wasn't the case in my home because I'm like, I work with toddlers and teenagers are basically the same people. So they basically are going through a lot of emotional changes, psychological changes, physical changes, and wanting independence. But the independence for a toddler looks like, oh, I'm myself. I'm separate from my parents. I'm not going anywhere outside. And then teenagers want to be with their social group and their peers, and so independence looks different. But that can be a really challenging period as well. And then 18 to 24, I think in our house has been some of the biggest shifts because that's actually like Dr. Montessori talked about childhood going through to 24 years old. And now brain research shows that this prefrontal cortex is developing into the early years, into the early 20s, right? And so it matches with that. And that's when you take away the prepared environment. So, for example, at our house, we had predictable rhythms. We'd check in with each other in the morning. What's your day looking like? Have you got enough time to get any of your work done for homework, blah, 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 and all these things. And all of a sudden they go off to university or they go off to do volunteer work or whatever they're doing outside of the prepared environment. And you have to see what comes up, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh, not everyone's as predictable as I am used to. So how do I deal with that? It's not that it's bad or not, but it just means that like we've had so many interesting discussions about like how it is for them to try things out for themselves and then work out how they are. Because they're also working out are the values that my family had, also their values. So it's actually can be a very big growth period, I guess, as they go out into the real world, into the other world. And it's not bad or hard, it's just different and it's been really fun. And I guess something I wasn't as expecting. So
Mhm.
I guess I don't think challenging is even the right word, but it's just something that I guess who knew? Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like I have a lot to look forward. And there was just this period. Maybe I was a little bit naive. I didn't want to believe that the terrible twos or threes were a thing. I don't even really want to call it that.
Yeah.
Definitely a shift in behavior, but it just went from 0 to 100, completely different person that I'm witnessing within a day. And it's like, what happened? So the fact that
Yeah.
you're saying toddlers are essentially like teenagers is pretty funny. And I
Yeah.
like that if they're jumping on the wrong bus, they're kind of working these things out themselves. It's real life experience. It's very human. So even like jumping on this interview this morning, how we were having some technical difficulties, it teaches kids to be adaptable and not so rigid. So there's a saying, what doesn't bend breaks. And I feel like it's very important for kids or humans in general to be adaptable. Mhm.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things I like about Montessori is that as an adult, you're also going to get it wrong. And so we're going to have to apologize as well, right? But also that you observe, you make a plan, you put the plan into action. And then instead of thinking the plan didn't work, you go, what worked, what didn't work? And then you adjust and you try it again and you just keep iterating until you kind of work it out. And as your children get older, instead of having rules, we kind of make agreements with them. So, and then if the agreement that you make didn't work, we're like, okay, a week later, let's check in and see how this is going. Okay, what's going well is this, and this needs to, let's try it again. And so it's also an evolving, living kind of document in your house, these agreements that you make. And that's all based on this, like in the 6 to 12 classroom, we make agreements with the children about what would make everyone feel safe in our classroom. And then one child might say, I think respect's really important. And they're like, okay, well, what does respect mean to you? And what does respect mean to you and you? And, and then you come up with these agreements together. And yourself, like if you've agreed to something, you're going to be much more involved in upholding it, right? And all you need to say to the child if they don't do it was like, what was our agreement about? And then they're like, they they know that's true. And then even if they're like, but you're like, oh, it sounds like you want to talk about it. We can talk about that at a neutral time, but not right now. Let's follow through with our agreement and we'll review it, blah, 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 on which day. So it's just so fun because there's no right or wrong. It's just constantly iterating and learning from our mistakes. And they see us doing that as well.
I like that, agreements. When could you start something like that? Would you be able to have conversations with that with a toddler?
Yeah, so, like, under 3, we're kind of in charge of what the limits are, right?
Yeah.
Because they're too young. They don't have the prefrontal cortex to develop that. But you've already seen from 2.5, 3, they move into what's called the conscious absorbent mind. So in the first 6 years, you have the absorbent mind, where they pick up everything like a sponge, he's copying, he's picking things up, like you said, he's modeling, and then he follows and he wants to exercise with you and all those things. But the 0 to 3 years is unconscious absorbent mind, where they pick things up regardless. They're not thinking, I need to remember that, I need to remember that. And then you get into Jax's age, like 2.5, 3, and all of a sudden the conscious part of their brain, which is also why you remember things from above, like around 3 and above, but you don't have any early childhood memory. So you've got the conscious of mind, and then you're actually going to go into these ideas and consciously understand them. So I think that's interesting too. Agreement. So then, because he's conscious, you're able to then make a plan with him. And of course, he may not be able to remember it, but you could say, so, Jax, what do you think about like bedtime? Like, what would make you feel comfortable in bed? And you can make a plan with him about what order he's going to get ready. Like, does he want to put on his PJs first or read books and those kind of things? And then he's involved in making the agreement. And it's going to be child age appropriate choices, of course. It's not like you're telling him, should we move to Austin or should we move to Los Angeles? Like that's not his choice.
Yeah.
And their choices for adults, but he can definitely have control over whether he wants for breakfast, for example, and those kind of things as well. So yeah, age appropriate agreements you can start. And then around 6 is when they really want to be involved, but there's already possibility to get younger kids involved.
A little earlier, you mentioned the other world. So I kind of wanted to save this towards the end, but since your kids are grown now,
Yeah.
I wanted to know, how does Montessori kind of bleed into adulthood? What have you seen with a teenager progressing into adulthood and transitioning into college? How do they fare?
So I think it's super fascinating because I think they're super prepared. They know how to think for themselves. They know when they don't know the answer to something, they look it up. They have very high expectations of themselves, and the only one setting the expectation is from themselves, not from outside, and that kind of thing. But in the greater part, like my kids' transition from Montessori to high school, from high school to university, has been pretty smooth. Um, my son, for example, when he was choosing the high school, they have punishments if they're late for school. They after 3 times being late, they will have to clean the, playground or stay back or something like this. And so I explained, in a Montessori school, they would make a plan with you and say, like, "I can see you're running late and you've been late a few times. Is there something that's going on at home? How can we make sure when you're at school? Can we text you to check you're on your way?" Blah, blah, blah. Like, they want to get you to school. Instead, this punishment is like, makes kids not want to go to school. And he says, I think it's a stupid rule, but he was like never late. Because he was probably late 5 times in 6 years at high school because he respects the rules. And he was like, his bike got a puncture. Maybe he slept late one day, but like in the big picture, he really respects those kind of things. So I think Montessori kids, are really independent, but they also take responsibility. And that's the other side too, is like, you don't want kids who only think of themselves. You want them to be able to live in society. So they've never had any issues like that. The only challenges my kids have had have just been like, what's my purpose? I really want my life to mean something. And so they're grappling with the same questions we might be still when we're 35 and 40 and whatever, those kind of things, is how do we give back? So it's not, but I think actually the skills that they have, like, very rarely Oliver's called to say, oh, like, how does insurance work again? Or do you mind helping me with my tax return? Like just some practical things like that. But like they set up their own internet when they moved out of home with a group of kids. They can cook their own meals. Like I always ask them, like, what did you cook this week? Because I'm always curious what recipes they're trying out. And pesto pasta is a thing at university if you're feeling lazy. But other than that, like sometimes they really like make some really nice things. And yeah, I'm excited for them because they're just becoming more and more themselves. And usually what you see in the 18 to 24 years is they really want to contribute and give back. So both of my kids have done like forms of volunteer work in those years as well. That's part of like what those children are looking for, to like, how can I contribute to society now that it's not just my school environment, but a bigger environment. Yeah.
Mhm. Was it required on your end for them to go into high school or continue education this route?
No, they can. So when they were choosing high school here in the Netherlands, we went around and visited all the schools, and they were allowed to choose which high school they went to. This was at 12 years old, and then I said the one that I didn't like and that I don't approve of the values is this one. So if that's okay, let's just like not have that one. But for many of the other schools, I think they're great, and you could choose anything. So again, that freedom within limits. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then when they were choosing universities, like there's just no way I had any chance. I visited one or two with them, and they mostly went off and saw their own things, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. So, yeah, it's very interesting. They even my son chose for, doing a computer science degree, and I was like, "Wow, I'm really surprised," because to me, it wasn't necessarily something that I would have chosen for him. And, because he's, like, always been very gentle and kind and teaching um, and compassionate and interested in sciences and things, but he also loves math, so it also makes sense that he also really likes the computer science program. So it's really fun to see what they choose for themselves, and they're on their own path.
Mhm. Have you heard of families where their children didn't decide to pursue any forms of higher education? And
Um,
how are they
yeah.
doing if
Yeah, so they've tried to go to university and they're like, "This doesn't work, I actually just wanna be an artist." And you're like, "Okay, let me see how we can support you to be an artist or how you can support yourself." So, yeah, basically Montessori is trying to develop every child to be the best version of themselves, whether they become the bus driver, a father, a, mailman, an Elon Musk, like a just someone who's big thinkers. Google guys went to Montessori schools, but it doesn't mean we're trying to make everyone a Google guy. It just means you have the possibility to use your skills to the potential that they'll be. Yeah.
Mhm. Gotcha, gotcha. So, rewinding back now, going back to toddler
Yeah.
stage, where we're currently at. In your book, you mentioned that there are some sensitive periods. Would you be able to go into what these periods are and what they may look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about the absorbent mind, which is like they absorb everything in their environment, but they also have these sensitive periods, which are almost like the spotlight of like, this is what I'm super interested in learning right now. And it sounds like for Jax, he was really into language and communication, right? Because he's like a sponge taking in everything. And if you model beautiful language, it's going to come out as well. Also, it sounds like you both took the time to listen to him so that he can talk and you respond and you ask interesting questions and you engage in this way. So language and communication is one of the sensitive periods. And you know language will plateau when they're learning to walk, for example, because it takes so much neurological effort for them to learn to walk or to learn to speak. So one of them tends to go faster than the other at a certain time. They don't tend to go exactly the same amount. And movement's the other one, right? So they're learning to walk, move their body, and then around 3, starting to coordinate their actions much more. So when you see a toddler painting, an 18-month-old will use their whole arm like this to paint, right? And then at what point does it actually become that they're using their wrist and making like more intentional strokes on the page? And then one day they make a face and you're like, oh my gosh, that's the conscious mind. Like they're actually making a representation of something where before it was just a movement. So you have movement, language, and then order and orientation are other sensitive periods that you will see a lot in the toddler years. And order is when you walk in, say someone changed your house around when you went out and then you came back in, you'd be like, "Where's the couch gone? I don't understand." But we're doing it all the time. Like one time we take off our shoes here, and the next time we take them off in our living room, sometimes in the bedroom. Just like for a toddler, that is super confusing. And it's much easier. Always, we come in, we put our shoes by the front door, and then we go off and do our thing. Whenever we get changed to have a bath, we put all our clothes into the laundry basket. Sometimes you get them undressed in their bedroom and you dump the clothes there, and sometimes you do it in the bathroom, and sometimes you do it in the living room. It's very confusing. But if we just do the same thing each time, it's predictable, they understand it, it's much calmer for their nervous systems, and they helps them to orient in this very big world where they don't have that much control over what's going on. So I think they'd be the three main ones that I talk about the sensitive periods for: the movement, the language, and the order and orientation.
Yeah, we've noticed that too. It's like if we kind of skip one of the order of operations for our little routines, whether that's bedtime or in the morning, he loves to read first thing and also eat what's called a chaffle. So it's like egg and cheese in a waffle maker, and he devours that every single morning. If we miss that, or say we have to rush out of the door, like we don't have time to do that in the morning, that's where things like you could tell he's not really at ease, and that's when things can kinda go into a spiral, and he'll be a little bit more on edge, may be a little bit more, predisposed to having tantrums and such, so routines in order seem to be very, very important with the kids. So what would be some ways that we can help our children become more independent and take on more responsibility within the house, give them more of a role within the family?
Yeah, so definitely we're going to have to allow more time, because the things that you're talking about that you do with Jax, it sometimes takes longer, right? So you can't expect that they're going to be able to put on their own shoes or help out with the washing if we want it done in a rush. So we have to say, okay, I'd love my child to be involved in these things, but it means I'm going to do less things, or I'm going to do it at a time like on the weekends when I don't have to be somewhere at that time. And then you build up the skills to eventually be able to just do it all the time. Slowing down, for example, to show them a skill, like, or actually to walk over to the bin to show them where the banana skin goes, as opposed to, it goes over there, it goes over there. And then we think, why aren't they doing it? Sometimes a toddler, you need to walk next to them and slow down and show them how it's actually done. And like, it's hilarious in my classroom. We make bananas as part of our snack, and the toddlers like to take off one piece of the banana skin, and then they go over to the bin, and it's a little foot pedal bin. And you see them like kind of working out how the foot pedal works and opening and closing the bin and getting it to go at the right time. And you realize how long it takes them just to get the bananas peel into the bin, where we just want it in the bin so we can move on to cutting the bananas. We have to actually realize that's part of the process, because we're in so much rush to get the bananas finished. We're actually, the toddler's time frame is like, I'm interested in the whole process. I'm interested in the skin and how the bin works, and we're not. So it's changing our mindset a little bit as well to help them become more independent. And big part of Montessori is scaffolding skills. So, for example, the first time I went to a Montessori playgroup with my son, I noticed all the kids seemed to be putting on their shoes by themselves. And I'm like, I'm still doing all of his shoes. And so I got home and I'm like, okay, I've got my little chair by the front door, which is what we're meant to do. And then I said, Oliver, you can put on your shoes. And he didn't put his shoes on. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go to the kitchen. I'm going to come back and he's going to put his shoes on. And he didn't. He's just sitting there. And I realized, oh, I've not even shown him how I put on shoes or to scaffold the skills. So, like, first I'm going to open up your shoe. Can you put your foot in? Okay, now I'll show you the Velcro. Can you try the next one? And we do it together. And then over time, you don't need to do the Velcro. He does the Velcro by himself. The next time, I don't need to open up the shoe. He works out how to get his foot in all by himself. So over time, you scaffold and you build these skills so that they can be independent and take on more responsibility, like getting themselves completely dressed. They might choose which clothes they put on. You might have a little dressing stool, like just a low stool in the dressing area, so that they know when I sit here, I get dressed, so that they're not just running around, to get dressed. They actually know what the plan is. And making things accessible also, because if I can only reach all of the things, then they can't choose their clothes. But doesn't mean you have to. I mean, it would be ideal if you have a low child size wardrobe, but we also have to be practical about accessibility. And maybe you just have a basket where the night before you pull out a couple of appropriate wear the appropriate clothes, and they get to choose from a little basket. Um, Inviting them to, do the washing, to help us load the dishwasher, to do all those things. They love contributing and being part of the family. And at the same time, you get your jobs done around the house. You have the communication and the vocabulary because you can name everything that you're touching. And it becomes like a beautiful connecting activity. And when you start young, it means that they're kind of used to doing these things. So it's never like, oh, Papa, you do it, Mama, you do it. It's actually like they're used to doing it together. That doesn't mean that you can't start if your child's 6 years old. It just means that it's going to take some practice before they realize, oh, actually, because you're part of the family, we also take responsibility as well.
Mhm. In one of your episodes I was just listening to yesterday, you mentioned that children are our greatest mirrors. And with what you're saying there, slowing down, I feel like this is something that all adults can do because I've noticed myself if I slow down and I just focus on one task, that task is going to be done much better. So by
Mhm.
slowing down, you actually get a better outcome in some instances. And there are going to be slip ups. There's going to be accidents. There's going to be mistakes. And we should have grace for our children in order to them to actually learn. Because if you're just coming down on them or you're kind of scolding them for making a mistake, who's really going to want to learn in that type of environment? If anything, that's going to kind of flatline any type of learning environment. They're going to want to go away from that. And what you're saying here too, it reminds me when I was coaching athletes. So I was working with like teenage athletes and I couldn't really understand what was going on here. I don't know what's going on in the brain. But as I'm training them to do like these certain movements, these certain speed drills, there'd be some kids that just could not get it. Like the coordination was not there at all. These are teenagers. You said toddlers are like teenagers. I don't know if it's exactly the same here, but one day out of nowhere, it could be weeks of this same drill and they wouldn't get it. But then in an instant, boom, you didn't even see a progression. There was nothing linear about it at all. If anything, you thought they were getting worse, but then it's like perfect. Like, how did that just happen? I didn't understand it. And it's something that I thought of as you were kind of discussing the banana peel and the garbage and how long it takes them. But overall, even as an adult, when we try out a new skill, you're probably gonna suck at it at first. And something that I like to say is like embrace the suck. You're trying something new, have some grace for yourself, be patient with yourself, slow down, you'll get it as long as you persist. And that's the same type of setup that I think we need to create for our children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So nice to hear you applying the same principles. And often I see some toddlers, for example, that seem to touch everything. They just make it, they leave a big line of things strewn around them. And the parents are like, I'm not sure if they're ever going to get this. But then what you see is these children tend to be kinesthetic learners where they need to touch and feel everything to learn. And then you see not much progression happening. And then all of a sudden, one day, they just do a nine-piece puzzle in one day. It's not like
Mhm.
where another child will do one piece, then two pieces, and three pieces. But this child's gone from nothing to like that kind of magic, like you're talking about with the athlete. It's pretty cool.
There's learning going on even if you can't personally see yourself.
Exactly. And the brain development, it's all rewiring also in the teenage years. So it makes sense that you see similarities in the brain.
What would be considered a Montessori activity? How would we set it up, and how would we show our children? Because I know that that's an important point that you touch on as well. What is the proper way to introduce a child to an activity?
Well, what's really interesting is we're taking Montessori principles from a Montessori classroom and we're applying them at home. And so some people will want to buy what they see in a Montessori classroom to teach their child maths and put it in their home. But we always say that our homes are not classrooms, right? And so if you see these beautiful Montessori math materials or a geography puzzle or something like this, it's tempting because you think, oh, that would be beautiful to have in my home. But actually, they're at school 6 hours a day. Even if they don't go to Montessori school, they're learning how to read, write, and things in that system. So trust that system. And then at home, a Montessori activity is something that focuses on one skill at a time, the thing that your child's learning to master. And you can have different areas. So, for example, for a toddler age, you'll have some language materials, and that could be like books. We're a language material because we're in conversation with them. And then you've got maybe vocabulary baskets where you could collect things from around your kitchen, put them in a basket, and then they might know the name of a whisk, but they may not know spatula. And so they find very easy for them to learn the same vocabulary. It's very easily for them to file in their mind. And you can even make pictures so that they realize that an object is the same as a picture. So this is a picture of a spatula and this is the spatula, and they're the same, and you can match them. And you might even see that like they've got a lion and then they run over to their book and they open up the book and they find the picture of the lion. So they're doing that
Mhm.
anyway. So that's kind of things you could have in the language area. You could have objects in manipulatives for working eye-hand coordination. And so then, again, based on what your child's interested in, I have this lock box where kids are opening padlocks and all these different types of locks. And that I hide things inside the box so that they're motivated to open it up. And then they're getting this great eye-hand coordination. I do the same with like little purses. And so they can try zippers and different press studs and things like that and hide little objects inside, and then they're working the eye-hand coordination. Or it might be a younger toddler who's just learning to post a ball. So you could cut a hole into a shoebox and they could post the ball in, and then they take the lid off and then they take the ball out and they repeat it. And then you can make it more difficult by posting coins, because so a coin you have to rotate till it fits into a slot and things like that. So again, you're observing what's my child most interested in. If they're into vehicles, then you could have a basket of vehicles that they learn the names of. So, for example, I have a basket which has got construction vehicles, and there's an excavator and a front wheel loader and a digger and a bulldozer, and they're all kind of different. And they are able to work out what the differences are. Sorry, a front wheel loader and a digger can sometimes be the same thing. But yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of really fun to take their interest. You might think they're just playing with vehicles, but then you can read books about vehicles. You can learn the names about vehicles. You can set up an art and craft activity that's like stamps with vehicles. You can find a threading activity that's like a train, and so they're learning to thread the train onto a thing. So you can work lots of areas based on the interest. And then you've got the art and craft area. And so it's very simple for a toddler. It's because you're mostly using it as self-expression to make movement, like I mentioned earlier when the child's painting. But so, for example, you can show them how a pencil works, but then you leave it up to them what they do with it. So we don't tend to give them coloring in sheets, but rather these are beautiful. We use like less is more, beautiful quality materials. So just buy a few of them, but then they make really good mark on the paper. And then I might do cutting with scissors, even with like a 18-month-old, 2-year-old. And you have like a strip of paper, and then I show them, look, and I show them how I snip it off. And that's much more satisfying than a big piece of paper that they can't really cut into yet. So I can snip. Then I could do gluing. I could do, they love clay or Play-Doh, or kinetic sand. They love like manipulating that. And then you could have some simple paints as well. Music and movement are also big parts that are in Montessori activities. So that each of them kind of targets this particular skill. And what's super interesting is I don't tend to go up to a child, like I said with the button frame, and say, can I show you the button frame? That's more for a child who's like a little bit older. First, if they go up to the button frame and they start trying it, then I might say, oh, can I show you? If wherever they get stuck trying to do the buttoning. So the same with the child who's trying to put the coin into the coin box. I'm going to just see if they can manage it themselves, and then I'll step in where they get stuck to say, look, and then I'll just model without talking how to drop it in. So particularly with children under 3, there's this acronym SHOW, which is, SHOW is slow hands, omit words. And then you basically, they can't understand. So the reason we do that is because if we're talking and we say, look, the coin, and we turn like this, they don't know whether to listen to us or whether to watch us. So instead we just go, look, and then we drop it in. Yeah. So that's some tips, hopefully, on what kind of activities you can set up, one activity at a time, based on your observation and how you can show them.
Love it. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of those toys, the coin, the ball, the cards. Just as you mentioned, as soon as he would see the little elephant or the tiger, he would sprint back to his room and, look, tiger, elephant. So those are all staples in our home for sure. And one thing, admittedly, I should probably work on, is whenever I'd see him progress and he'd be able to get the coin in or the ball in repeatedly, continuous, without any type of struggle, is I would celebrate it. I would get very, very excited. So getting into praise, I've also heard and read that praise, saying good job, offering an external um, stimulus, I guess, in order for them to keep doing this work may not be the best. Would you be able to elaborate on why that may not be the best approach?
Yeah, exactly. So when we say good job, or we're clapping them and those kind of things, they're like, oh, Papa's really proud of me. He's really excited. He seems really happy. So I'm going to keep doing that because it makes my Papa happy. And that is extrinsic motivation. Where if we say, oh, you did it, you put the ball into the hole, then they're like, yeah, I did that, huh? Or if like they walk across the room for the first time, you just walked from there to there. You look so excited. They're like, yeah, I just walked there. So again, we're building the intrinsic motivation and the self-construction of who am I and what I can do. And so you can kind of see the difference is like every time I say good job, they're looking to me. Every time we say you did it, they're looking to themselves. If I go, oh, you got straight A's, I'm just trying to meet the curriculum, or you worked really hard on that. That's the effort that they put in. So if you're the coach and you're working with these teenagers, the same principles apply, right? It's like you can just like clap them, go, woo, great job. Or you can say, you nailed that, like take off. And all we need to work on is like finalizing like the maintaining your speed the whole way through the run. Because you're coaching them, you're showing them where they can keep working on. And as well as like, yeah, you can give them feedback, like you nailed that bit where you took it off. And so you're kind of guiding them and encouraging them. And it's all about the effort as opposed to that they won the race at the
Mm.
very end. Yeah. Because
It's almost
actually
like
the race being won is just like that tough final bit. It's the journey. And we're learning that as
mm,
adults, aren't we? Is like we're so focused on the product, but actually it's the journey that we take is actually 95% of the joy.
mhm. It's almost like they could become addicted to validation if that's the route that's chosen,
Yeah,
I suppose.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm. Now, what would be some Montessori approved toys? So we don't have like a whole bunch of action figures or anything like that. We do have dinosaurs. He loves dinosaurs. But we chose, I would say Jade, hats off to her. She chose to stick with like wooden type of toys, things that weren't super vibrant and colorful, distracting, and also no light up toys. And we tend to stay away from screens as well. We made it a point where we're not going to introduce any type of screens prior to 1 year. We let him get a little bit of screen time now with one of his favorite shows, but again, we don't want anything that's super stimulating, um, and a little bit more realistic, or at least teaches some type of lesson involved. So, what would be some Montessori approved toys, or what would not be a Montessori approved toy?
So, particularly in this first 6 years, they're in a sensorial stage of development, which means that everything they learn is going to be something that they learn through their senses. And so, it's actually much better to have these hands on learning materials, like you say, rather than a screen. So, even if it was a Montessori app, they're not really feeling and getting a sandpaper letter, is when you feel it, touch it, hear it. And instead, you just get this screen experience. But mostly, screens are passive, and we want the child to be engaged and active. So, we're looking for things like you're saying that don't light up because then they just hit a button and the toy does all the work. So instead, you're like, I'm going to give them simple things that they have to manipulate to make it work. And basically, Dr. Montessori said, you first give to the hand and then give to the mind. And even if you write things down rather than just type it, you're going to understand and process it better. And so these hands-on learning materials, we in Montessori right through to 12 years old, they often come back to the concrete learning materials if they kind of can't abstract. And it helps them to have this rich base in reality, particularly in these first 6 years. And then later you can add more abstract things into it. What's super interesting is that actually um, a lot of people put Montessori onto toys and to make them sell, but it's mostly, something that's commercial as opposed to there's Montessori materials in a classroom, but actually Dr. Montessori didn't ever design things for in the home. You, c- a piece of a dustpan and a broom is just as much a Montessori material as, a beautiful posting activity or the lockbox. So what you call a Montessori approved toy is actually something that we're helping parents to decide this will help the development of your child if they're interested in this thing right now. But it's so abstract, right? So instead, like look for what your child's most interested in. How can I encourage that? It could be like buttons, just posting them into a slot, and it doesn't have to be something that you buy that's labeled Montessori toy.
Mm. You touched on something there. First, give it to the hand, then give it to the mind. That was a quote.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the exact quote, but that's kind of the principle is that, like, for a child to understand something, we can tell them, I'll tell you this is the answer, or we can find a way that they have to work it out themselves. So there's this great example. My son, when he was in primary school, he's learning the circumference of a circle. And he said, "Oh, mum, I'm learning the lesson for a circumference of a circle." And I said, "Oh, how exciting, pi d." And he looked at me and went, "I don't know, I'm not up to that yet. But basically, I've got pieces of string and I'm measuring around the size of a circle and I'm measuring the diameter. And when I divide the circumference by the diameter, I get this number 3.14 something, something, something." And I'm like, son just discovered pi, it's going to be much more interesting. They actually develop the formula themselves to work out pi d, and then you never forget the formula.
Hmm. Yeah, true. You know how to get back to it.
Hmm. Exactly. So we're giving the kids the tools that they can make the discoveries for themselves.
You also mentioned writing something down instead of like typing. And this is something that I was actually trying to find some research on probably sometime last year because I came to a realization one day that I forgot how to write in cursive. So I actively
Mm.
started practicing it, and within like 2 days, I was able to fluently write in cursive again. I think I thought about this because I don't know if they're actually teaching cursive in public education anymore. But with that in mind, like your hands and your feet are how you interact with your environment. So actually actively having to write something where
Mhm.
each pencil or pen stroke is going to be a little bit different. You have to actively move your hand around as opposed to typing where the sensation is exactly the same every single time. I was wondering what that was doing to kids because some of the kids that I work with, I know that they're doing all of their work on laptops and tablets nowadays. I don't know if you'd
Yeah.
had insight into that.
No, I think it's super interesting. All I can say is my experience of kids in Montessori classrooms, we still definitely teach how to do cursive and script in from 3 to 12 years old. We actually teach them quite young to learn to write. They learn indirectly already when we're in my classroom because we set up activities to move from the left of the body to the right. We do things to cross the midline, so again, the coordination of the hemispheres of their brain kind of come together where kids who are on the laptop may not happen like that. Um, and then you move once the child starts getting interested in letters, you might have a sand tray and they can actually like draw the letters in the sand because some kids don't want to mark the paper that makes it permanent and they can just shake it off if it's like not perfect. And then they can practice as many times as they like. And they can also write before they read. So, for example, they will start to learn the sounds of the letters. So, we don't teach them this is A, we say ah. And so, this is the sound of ah, ah. And then when they wanna spell apple, they go, "Ah, p, l, and they can spell it out, and then they takes another whole step for them to synthesize that together to read it back apple. But and then they're actually learning to write before they read. So they
Hmm.
could write you a letter, Papa, P, and then if you said, "Oh, what does it say?" They might not even know. So you never say that. You never test a child. You just wait till they say, "It says Papa." I wrote, "Dear Papa." And also this the spelling is super funny because it might be DIR for dear, but over time they'll gradually learn the spelling as well and it will correct itself.
What age do you typically see that happen at?
Oh gosh, we don't love ages in Montessori because every child's developing on their own timeline. But I've seen some children be able to do writing and spelling around 4, and spelling gets better at 5 and 6. Yeah.
I like that you don't really pay attention to age. I don't either. I
Yeah,
I
exactly.
have this weird thing where it's like, I don't wanna be told happy birthday or something because then it's just kinda furthering the fact that I'm getting older, so if I don't pay attention to that, then I'm young forever. At least that's what I have up here, so there we go.
Actually, I like growing older, but we can have that as another conversation maybe.
So let's talk about when things don't necessarily go the way that we want them to. So if we have a toddler that doesn't really wanna cooperate with us or is, really refusing to partake, then how can we either set some boundaries or get them to cooperate without using bribery or threats?
Yeah. So bribery and threats, like you say, are basically extrinsic motivation. So that's the other side of the coin to the good job. And basically, again, you're just teaching them. If I do that, then I'll get a toy. This is the bribery. Or if I do that, Papa's going to be angry at me. So that's the threat, and I don't want that. So either they're going to try and avoid that, so they're going to sneak behind your back to do it, or they're going to not do it and they're going to be like scared of you. And instead, we want children to trust us and to have a connecting relationship. And so we want to build ways of getting their cooperation that aren't based on bribery and threats. And so we still need to get out of the house to get to work, and sometimes we have to drop them to school, to daycare, and all those kind of things. But we offer choices, like, for example, would you like to help me carry my bag, or would you like to carry the keys? Or, get them involved in the thing that we're doing. You can, like you said, have the same rhythm every day so that they know what comes next. That can also help. But we don't have to be strict. Sometimes we're going to have to do something out of order. We don't have time for that. What did you call your waffle?
Order of operations?
So the order of operations, but you had a type of waffle that you make in the morning called a groffle or something? I
Oh,
don't know.
a chaffle.
A
Chaffle.
choffle. So you don't have to make the choffle. And so some days you're not going to be able to. Then you can say, today we're not going to be able to make the choffle. What would you like to take with us instead? Shall we pack this choffle, or should we take something? So you get them involved in the decisions to hopefully avoid the meltdown. Or, they're going to have the meltdown, and I'm going to build that into the, leading process that we're part of. And then we always like to start with connection. So, for example, if you wake up and you just start barking orders, this is all the things that we need to do. Instead, like, let's just cuddle, let's read books, let's play music, whatever their favorite thing is. And when you've filled their tank with connection, then they're usually like happy to come and help you make the breakfast and get dressed together and those kind of things as well. So I'm kind of one parent, we decided it was like a Venn diagram I was doing to them. And like, this is what we want them to do, a circle here, and this is a circle, what they want to do. And we're trying to make the circles intersect like a Venn diagram to make it the sweet spot. And that's perfect. It's like they actually enjoying whatever we need them to do.
Mhm. Yeah, I found that if I prep Jack, so say for instance, if I know that we're gonna have a really busy morning and we gotta get out of the house fast, if I prep him the morning or the night before, things tend to go a little bit smoother because he knows what's up rather than just surprising him, taking him out of his routine, and then, hey, we're in the car, we're heading over here. You don't even want to go there. Giving
Yeah.
him the options as well definitely helps. So that's kind of our way of setting some type of boundaries. Like, you may not want to put on your shirt, but we're going to give you this option to wear one of these two. That way, at least you are empowered with some type of decision. You have some type of say, even though you may not even want to go to grandpa's house or wherever it may be.
Yeah.
Now, say, for instance, we do have a meltdown. How can we handle this in a rational way where we're not engaging in a power struggle? What would be a power struggle, and how can we help them kind of calm down in a safe manner?
Yeah. I think the first thing is understanding that they would do better if they could do better. So they're having a tantrum. They're telling me, I am totally dysregulated right now, and I need you to help me to calm down. Because usually we're just like, stop crying, don't worry about it, And actually, if they could do better, they would. So our job is to co regulate with them. So as the adult, we need to be calm ourselves, breathe as much as we need to, so that we can share our calm with them, and we can offer them a hug. Like, would you like a hug? And like, I find that like 50% of kids like hugs. So then you can hug them as they kind of really upset to help them calm down. And some kids hate hugs and they'll push you away. But then it's our job to keep them safe. I never ignore a tantrum, because otherwise it would be like, you ask me a question, I just walk off to make a cup of tea, like I'm not interested. And so I always make sure that I check in with them like maybe once a minute to say like, I'm here, let me know if you need anything, or would you like a hug? I don't start when they're in the meltdown. I don't actually talk to them like trying to be rational with them and those kind of things, because I don't know if you've ever heard of the whole brain child, but basically Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson have a picture of the brain that's when they flip their lid, the front part of their brain, the top part of their brain isn't accessible. They're acting from their amygdala. And so it's our job to help them calm down so that they can hear us again. And then you might hear them, and, it could take 45 minutes for them to have a tantrum, for them to feel embarrassed and rage and fury and those kind of things. And then they come back to calm, and then they come over. So we had a child in our class who didn't want their diaper changed, and they're like 2.5, and they're kind of learning soon to not have diapers. But at the moment they still have their diapers on, and they were like, I want the dirty diaper back on. And then I was going, yeah, I can't put the diaper back on. They're getting in a power struggle. And I just went over and I said, Yeah, feeling you really wish you could put the dirty diaper back on. Yeah. Yeah. And you could just see his body just melted and relaxed. I didn't try and fight with him. I just said, "You wish you could." I didn't say you can put it back on. I just empathized with him
Mm,
and he calmed down. And I'm just sharing my calm with him and with the mother who was up, of course, understandably upset. She doesn't want the child to be running around naked in the playgroup. She doesn't want him to put a poopy diaper back on. But, I just said, "Oh, I'm going to put this poopy diaper away. Yeah, I know you really want to put it on. I'm putting it over here." And I'm using a really calm voice, And then had they needed to make amends, once the diapers are on and they've all come down, then I would help them to make amends as well. Because that making amends is really important too. Say they've got really upset and they've thrown everything on the floor and they've broken something or they've hurt someone, then once they're calm, then we can actually get an authentic way of making it up to somebody else as well.
mhm. So how would you model an apology rather than trying to get them to go say sorry for hitting you or something like that? Because generally, at the toddler stage, what I've experienced is that a lot of responses are no. They don't wanna
Mhm.
do that at all.
Yeah.
So something that I've read personally is you apologize kind of for them. So, "Sorry for hitting you, Tina," or whatever it may be, and then just leaving it at that, not having to necessarily explain why you did that, it's just apologizing, moving on. Don't say too much, less is kinda more here. Would that be appropriate?
That would be appropriate, exactly. So you can't expect the young ones to do the apology necessarily, but I do definitely like to model making it up to the person. I give a few more options. So I say, should we offer a hug or should we get a tissue for our friend? And then I can go over to the tissue box, they can get the tissue, they can hand it over. So I'm kind of also getting them involved. I can apologize or I could get a wet cloth and those kind of things, particularly if they've hit us, then like it's a bit hard to apologize to myself. So I might say, "Oh, can you see here? I'm really red because you hit me. And like, let's go and get a wet cloth and let's put it on and let's make it better." Because also what's really interesting, it's a silly story, but when my dog was a puppy, I was walking her around the block and she pooped right on my neighbor's like area, the road right outside the neighbor's house. And the neighbor came out and was super angry. And it was, of course, the diarrhea poops. Poop was like everywhere. And I'm trying to clean it up as best as possible with the poopy bags I had. And I kind of left thinking I'm never going to be able to like walk past that woman's house again because she was so angry. And then I went home, calmed down. I went, "Oh, I can just go back and wash it down, right? So I'm just going to go and wash it down. I don't care if she notices or not, but I know I will have cleaned it up." So I went back to make amends, right? And she happened to come out and she went, "Oh, thank you so much for doing that. No one ever does that." And I realized at that moment, I was doing it to make it up to her, but I was also doing it to absolve my own guilt. So that's also another reason why why you make amends when you do an apology, because it actually also helps you to move on
Mhm.
as much as for the other person who you're making it up to.
Are you still actively teaching?
Yeah, I'm in the classroom every day. Yeah.
How often do you get tantrums? Or is it relatively calm? I'm not trying to make it out to be like Montessori children are perfect angels. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
gonna be some, but what do you notice from the 2 different groups, public education, Montessori? What are the main differences in demeanor that you see?
So I think that there's less tantrums for sure, because usually the parents are taking more time to talk with their child, explain what's going on, and those kind of things. And tantrums are inevitable because the child also needs to work out what the limits are and that my parent's going to keep me safe. And some children are just more likely to push limits as well. So I'm not going to say there's never a tantrum, but what you do see is the parents are able to handle the tantrums. And that's what we want to show them, is that I love you even at your worst, even when you're having the hardest time, just the same as you hope that your loved one, your partner, would actually like give you a hug if you were having a hard time, as opposed to ignoring you or thinking you're a bad person because you lost it. And it's just life. And we're there to help them when they're dysregulated, and we come back to calm and we'll do it better next time. And you learn your child. And with neurodivergent children, sometimes they can be more volatile. So it's also, yeah, but in the big picture, the adults have more skills. They have techniques to help co regulate with their child. And the preparation, you often save time in the long run by taking a little bit more time to explain something to your child.
Mhm.
So both.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've noticed myself. So are the parents present while the kids are engaging the class?
Yeah, so I actually have a parent-child class because I love working with the parent as well as the child. So I have 12 children who come every morning. So there's 5 groups, so there's 60 families that come during the week. And then they also take all the principles and then they get to put into practice for the rest of the child's life. So that's why I love having the parents in the classroom as well, while the child's exploring and they get to know their child.
And so if they have the skills to meet the child with a tantrum if it does occur, does
Yeah.
it ever require removing the child from the classroom?
Sometimes people will go outside if they feel like that will help their child to calm down,
True.
but no one minds. If they're having a tantrum in the classroom, they're having a tantrum in the classroom, that happens. But the same as in the supermarket, like I would just do exactly the same in the supermarket. But if my child's feeling really embarrassed from being in the supermarket, then I'm saying, oh, let's take it outside. Or if I'm getting really I'm making it uncomfortable for everybody else. It's like, oh, everyone's having a hard time here. We're going to try and find somewhere quiet that we can go to be while you're having a hard time. So it's not because we're punishing them that they're being removed. It's more just like it will be more appropriate for that child to have a quiet space for themselves.
Yeah, because I was curious about the other kids, if that could set off like a domino effect where if they see this kid spiraling, then it's just like a cluster of kids losing it.
It's super interesting. The more the energy gets bigger, the more I regulate the whole classroom with my energy. Do you know? So the more bigger energy you feel, the calmer energy you exude. That's what I've learned after 22 years in the classroom.
Has
Another
there
thing that's interesting too, oh, sorry,
Go for it.
is that you were talking about they're more likely to be tantrums or not. There's a lot of calm in the Montessori classroom. And my reason is this is that when each of the toddlers are working, these 12 kids are all working in different parts of the classroom, and there's 12 adults in the space. So there's a lot of people in one room. It's calm because, when you're playing music and you're so in the zone, or you're doing your running or your exercise or whatever, you feel calm and regulated, right? So all these children are finding activities that are meeting their needs. So they're feeling super calm and regulated. So then if they fall off their chair, it's kind of easy for them to like laugh or just like calm back down. But there's going to be times when we're a little bit tired or we're not feeling 100%. And then everything's going to kind of like upset us. But I think most people are walking around, a lot of children, because they're on screens and they have a lot of busy schedules and they're all overscheduled and we've got way too high expectations. They're all living with their system so highly dysregulated that it's tiny little things that trigger them off. Where over time, the more and more you practice the Montessori approach, they're mostly regulated, and then takes a lot more before they get
Yeah,
dysregulated.
until that threshold is met.
Exactly.
What I've found is that the biggest things that are gonna cause the tantrum would be a disruption. So you mentioned how if you're in a flow, you're playing music or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden that activity ends or you get pulled away from it before you are ready to give it up. That abrupt change is usually
Mm.
what will spark and cause the tantrum or the disaster, the meltdown.
Yeah. I mean, I've got some ideas about some transitions as well. So
That's
maybe
what I
that's
wanna know. So what would be some good ways to transition from an activity? Because if a kid is really engaged and then you're just taking him away from that, that is probably going to lead to a meltdown. How can we
yeah.
avoid that, and how would you cease inactivity?
Yeah. So as much as possible, we try not to interrupt their activities. So if they need their diaper changed, we can wait 5 minutes till they usually finish their thing. But if in those times when you just need to go or it's meal time and they're just doing some open-ended play and it's not going to kind of wrap up naturally, then I like to, like, for example, I was in a Montessori classroom observing, and the teacher would put on some music to tell the children that it was time for circle time. And it was this beautiful classical music. And the children, you could see them go, oh, it's time to start getting ready for circle time. Some kids went longer to finish what they were doing and then pack away. Some children packed away quite quickly. But within 5 or 10 minutes, they were all done. So it kind of meant it's not right now. Papa doesn't need me to come right this second, but he's going to give me some time. So it could be that you put on some music. In my classroom, when we come to snack time, I hum the same song every time. And when we transition to singing time, I hum the same song. And I feel like the Pied Piper because literally it's that order and predictability. They know what's going to happen. And you see the children wrapping up and finishing, but it's not like, I need you to come right now. And that takes away the demand energy from it as well as helping the children make the transition. And if you're at the playground, you can give your children a heads up, like, we're going to be leaving in 5 minutes. What's the last thing you want to play on before we leave? And so you're again getting them involved in the decision so that the cooperation comes from them feeling part of the solution, even if they're only 3 years old.
Mm. That definitely could have helped me the other day when we were at the museum. He did not want to leave his
Yeah.
spontaneous dinosaur exhibit, so
That's funny. And there's also like the notebook is really useful. My website's called the Montessori Notebook. And for one of the reasons is that I always have a notebook in my pocket. And so if they want to really leave the dinosaur museum, they don't want to leave, I'm going to write, I can hear you're loving it so much. I'm going to get out my notebook and I'm going to draw a picture of the dinosaur so that we know that we're going to come back to the dinosaur. And you can hold on to this piece of paper if you like, Jax. And because then that I'm going to stick to my promise, and then we're going to leave the museum. And next time when we come back, then we'll, cross that out and we will have done it. So you can even have a notebook for each child, in your family if you really want to, if you're using it a lot. But honestly, because you've acknowledged it, it's so important to them that just writing it down in a notebook feels like I'm really heard. So that can also help.
mm. Have you had a worst day that you could discuss?
I
Or is it
don't
just
have
all learning? It's all learning.
It's all learning, but hilariously, I had a hard day with my dog today, and, like,
Mm,
she's my toddler in my house right now, and she was barking at the neighbor, and it was no worse than she ever barks, but it was me that was dysregulated, so I wasn't able to regulate her. So I like to say I had an argument with my dog, and then we had to apologize and make it up to each other, But when I feel dysregulated, I'm like, "I need to clean up my side of the street." So I went into a basement that we have, and I just, kind of, made some kind of verbal sounds like but I'm not shouting at anyone. I'm just releasing the emotions in my body to release the frustrations, not throw them at anybody else. Because if I don't do that, then someone might see me later in the store and I'll get angry at them. It's our responsibility to keep our side of the street clean.
mm,
And she will keep being the dog because she's a dog, and she will
mhm,
keep barking at people because she wants to protect her, area. And, that's just how we show up. It's the same with the child. They're going to keep being a toddler. They're not going to know the rules. We're going to, it's the first time, why can't I take that toy of somebody else? You know, because they don't know about sharing and that we take turns and that we don't just take something out of someone's hand. So they're going to get it wrong, and we're there to guide them. And if we get irritated by it, we're like, okay, I could have done that better. Again, breathe, get rid of my
yeah,
emotions, and then come back and make it better with everyone.
yeah. Have a little bit of grace for yourself because as a parent, you're probably gonna slip up as well. And
Absolutely.
another thing that you mentioned in the podcast is for any expecting your new parents, sleep definitely becomes dysregulated with a infant with a newborn. And I love what you said there, how like clean up your side of the street first. It also reminds me of you can't pour from an empty cup. So these first few months can be very, very challenging when you are sleep deprived. Um, Other things may kind of fall by the wayside. You may lose your exercise routine. You may not feel up to exercising. A lot of things are going to be changing. So a lot of disruptions to your schedule. You now have to be considerate of the infant schedule as well, trying to get everything on a timely routine, figure out their rhythms. What would be some ways to prepare ourselves for parenthood, knowing what you know now?
Honestly, I think I have to run with the theme of this podcast episode, which is there's no way really you can prepare, but you're going to make mistakes along the way, and it's part of the journey, and you're constantly correcting and getting clearer. I think the one thing that you can do beforehand is be clear on your values that you want to pass on to your child, because your values are things that are part of who you are. And that's kind of all you can do. Like, imagine you had 4 children. You can't kind of solve every argument for them, but you can pass on your values, what's important to you about treating other people, how if you donate and support, organizations, um, values around the environment and how often you travel, things like that. What's important in your house?
Mhm,
Thinking creatively. getting out into nature, all that kind of thing. That's kind of the big picture parenting things that you can think about before. But actually, how you're going to deal with a child who doesn't sleep, you're going to have to follow your instinct as much as possible. And what we like to do in Montessori with sleep is like observe the child, what's helping them to fall asleep. We give as little help as possible, but as much as necessary. Get out as much sleep as we can. And then even the first 6 to 8 weeks that we have a newborn in the home, they like to call that the symbiotic period. And a symbiosis is, when it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So the child's getting to know us and we're getting to know them as well. And if you've got, for example, Jax is the older one, and you like, how do we become a family of four in this situation? And so that 6 to 8 weeks, maybe our fitness, we can just say, like, all we're going to do is we're just going to be a bubble for 6 to 8 weeks. We're taking away all the demands. We're not going to work for that period of time. And the focus is on that. And anyone who wants to come and visit, they're actually here to help support us. They get a job from the fridge. We're not there to entertain them. And we're our bubble. And that's how you take care of yourself for that first 8 weeks. And then you build in a routine like, okay, I'm going to be looking after the kids in the morning so that you can get to the gym, vice versa. And the families that do the best are the ones who all look out for each other. Because yes, the newborn's very important, but you're right, you can't feed from an empty tank. So you need to keep nourishing each other, getting as much rest as you can, getting to support extra, family might come to visit, or if you have the resources to have some help around the home, to clean for you. Maybe that could be the most helpful thing that you could get help with, or someone to do your washing. So like, yeah, your friend comes over and you're like, guess what? You're on washing duty today. That's what we need you to do.
Yep.
We get to play with the baby.
Yep.
Or yeah, just practical things like that.
So anyone listening to this, if you are having, if you have friends that are expecting, just know that they are probably going to need help with that type of stuff and not necessarily help holding the baby. Like they want to hold the baby, we need help with other stuff, please. And I want to double down on what you said. Like, be clear on your values because I feel like that is what holds you together once you transition in parenthood. If you're not clear on that prior, if you don't really know yourself, I'm speaking for myself. I can kind of speak for Jade as well. Throughout the process, you can kind of lose yourself. I can't really put it into words. Just like there was a personal weird feeling for myself where I didn't know who I really was anymore. So holding on to the values, sticking to the things that I would typically do, even though they didn't seem to be as effective. So say for instance, you're putting the input in, but you're not really seeing the output. There was almost like a little bit of a lag there. It was probably due to sleep deprivation. I don't know. But it took a while for me to feel like myself again. And I feel like actually having the values that I did and not just going off the rails really helped me come back to myself much sooner. If
Yeah,
that
it's
makes
beautiful. Absolutely. Self-awareness and learning, just seeing it as a learning. Yeah.
sense. Last question I have for you, Simone. How can we put ourselves or our relationship with our partners first when we are transitioning into parenthood without feeling any type of guilt? If you have any advice regarding this.
Well, notice the guilt arising, feel the guilt. But yeah, it is important that we are regulated to look after our humans, because they're going to be dysregulated. So, as much as possible, if we can put our priorities, we know that we need to eat nourishing food, we know that we need to be out in nature, we know that we need to do a certain amount of exercise in our day, or that we want to do work because that gives us purpose. Whatever those things are that you need to be a calm, regulated human, then do those things. Like for me, it's meditation in the morning and some yoga and, prioritizing those things to help me be regulated so that when everyone else is dysregulated, I can be calm. And then similarly, if you ignore your relationship with Jade, then you're going to be kind of parenting on islands. And instead, if your child's going to feel much more secure if you're working together. So not all of us have partners, to support us, but if you're in a partnership, how can we support each other? So yes, like Montessori is a child-led parenting approach, but it's not at the expense of the parents. It's actually how can James have his needs met? How can Jade have her needs met? How can Jax have their needs met? And potentially a new baby, how can you all have your needs met? We're going to have to be creative because we've got like only 24 hours in the day and little sleep. but we can all, do our best. And it may not look perfect, but it's because there's no perfect, right? But it's just like doing the best that we can to meet all of those needs and making that a priority. So I think having a really strong is just the foundation of your house is like working together. And even when couples decide that they need to separate, it can still be a strong family, because you can still have family values but live in two different homes. And I think that's really important for families to know that if you're separated from their mother or their father, you speak kindly about the other parent. You don't put the child in the middle, say, tell papa this, tell mama that. You really take responsibility for your things and you let the child know that it's nothing to do with them. It's just because two parents choose not to, be in a relationship anymore.
Mhm. I could see that. Yeah, don't just put everything on the kid when it's not their responsibility. You're supposed to be the ones guiding them, even though Montessori child-led kind of parenting. But I have loved this conversation, Simone. I feel like this is a little brief into my second run at parenthood. I've heard that having another kid, 1 plus 1 is not 2. It's like exponential. So I'm definitely gonna have to find ways to get creative to nourish all of us, and myself included in that. Would you be able to what do you have going on with your courses? I did see on your website that you have a whole slew of courses. Do you have any other books coming out? Do you have any new courses coming out, or how would people be able to work with you in person in your classroom?
Yeah, so I do have online workshops, so you can go to the Montessori Notebook.com and check out all the online courses. One of my favorite programs that I have is called the 52 Weeks of Montessori, and it's really affordably priced at $49 US. And basically, you get a card a week. It's just one part of Montessori to practice, so it's very hands-on. So it's like this is the theme, and then how you put it into practice. So the very first week is connection, because without connection, you get very little cooperation, and each week builds on over the course of a year. So that's a really fun program you can follow. But if you also sign up for the newsletter, you can hear if there's any live workshops that are going on, any news that's coming out. I'd love to connect with anyone who's interested in the Montessori approach.
Perfect. Love it. Again, thank you so much for your time, Simone. I hope that this provides a little bit of insight to any new expecting parents out there and that they look into and research the Montessori approach. So
Yeah, thanks
thank
so
you
much
for
for
your time.
having me and the interesting conversation. Bye, everyone.